TikTok.
TikTok. TikTok.
TikTok.
TikTok.
TikTok.
TikTok.
TikTok.
TikTok. TikTok.
Let's talk about the real reason the government wants to ban TikTok.
If the bill becomes law, it will mean the end of TikTok in the US.
Lawmakers cite growing concerns that TikTok's Chinese parent company poses a major threat to our national security.
They set to vote on a bill as early as this week.
This is what lawmakers are saying concerns a national security issue.
Either divest yourself of the Chinese parent company or we'll ban you.
But Democrats and Republicans are on the same page.
Energy and Commerce Committee voted 50-0, unanimous.
Yeah, and there would be a lot of beneficiaries also of a TikTok ban, Meta being one of them.
There are plenty of US-based companies that do all of this data. On what type of legal grounds can the US demand TikTok a massive change in separating itself from its parent company ByteDance?
We will not stop fighting and advocating for you. We will continue to do all we can, including exercising our legal rights, to protect this amazing platform that we have built with you.
On March 13, 2024, the U.S. House of Representatives passed what the internet has been calling the TikTok ban, and things have been heated. Congress considers TikTok to be a national security threat, specifically because TikTok is owned by a Chinese company called ByteDance. They are alleging that the Chinese Communist Party, aka the CCP, has access to TikTok's data and code and are using this in order to spy on Americans.
The chief concern, critics say, protecting U.S. data from the Chinese government.
Whether or not China will then have access to data from Americans using that app.
However, TikTokers and young Americans are calling bull.
And they were absolutely hyperventilating over China owns TikTok so they can measure the pupils to get the dopamine.
Harvesting your data, like, you clearly don't understand the nature of cyber warfare today, and you should read this book.
They argue that every nation has everybody else's data anyways, and that if Congress really wants to do something about it, that they should be passing comprehensive data privacy laws that would tackle not only TikTok, but also companies like Facebook and Google.
I work in politics full-time, and I've worked with members of Congress consistently over the last 4 years when it comes to legislation, and this is how I feel about this TikTok ban.
Because TikTok is only doing what many other social media companies have done for decades, even if they're not from an adversarial government.
With Congressman Dan Crenshaw saying, and this isn't because we're old and we don't know how to use the technology. He then admitted that this legislation will not stop foreign companies from buying our data from a million other places.
So today I'm going to investigate what is actually going on here. How big is TikTok's security threat? Is it different than the data privacy issues that we see with companies like Facebook and Google? What is actually going to happen if TikTok gets banned? Let's find out. Okay, first things first, technically, this is not a TikTok ban. The act itself is called Protecting Americans from Foreign Adversary Controlled Applications Act. Its summary states that it's designed to protect the national security of the United States from the threat posed by foreign adversary-controlled applications, such as TikTok and any successor application or service, and any other application or service developed or provided by ByteDance or an entity under the control of ByteDance. So basically what this means is the United States government doesn't want companies that are owned by potential adversary nations, China, Iran, North Korea, and Russia, to have direct access to the 170 million Americans who have TikTok. Yes, that's right. There are 170 million American users on TikTok, and that is, yes, half of the population of the United States. And a lot of the argument that they are trying to make here, which I actually do think is somewhat valid, they wouldn't allow countries like China or Russia to try to own news organizations like CNN, the New York Times, or Fox News. So it's true that we already have laws like this in media, but we've never had a law like this when it comes to social media, because there hasn't been an adversarial nation social media platform that has gotten over 170 million Americans to download the app. In addition, this bill doesn't say that TikTok is going to be banned immediately. It says that TikTok or any other company that ends up in this kind of a situation is going to be forced to sell the company to either another individual or another company that is ideally based in the US or somewhere else in the world that's not one of those 4 countries. And that if the House of Representatives, the Senate, and the President agree that they would like to ban this app for these reasons, they would have 180 days to try to create a sale. That 180 days will start when Biden signs that bill. And so we do have plenty of time before this law potentially gets to that point. However, if the bill is passed and the company does not sell itself within 180 days, the app would be effectively banned from the United States. So no, it's not a ban, but yes, it could be a ban. It very well could be. However, we're still in the very early days of the situation. The bill went through the House of Representatives, and after a large group of congressional officials left a security briefing on the issue, the House ended up finding some of the largest bipartisan support for any bill in the last several years. Go after TikTok, essentially. Notable exceptions to this included AOC and Marjorie Taylor Greene, which frankly made me giggle a little. President Biden has stated that he will sign it if it comes to his desk, but the Senate is in the middle of trying to see if they can declassify what was shared at that congressional hearing so that the American public can better understand what it is the congressional officials were so afraid of. But before this bill was passed by the House of Representatives, TikTok asked its users to reach out to their congressional officials.
We will not stop fighting and advocating for you. I encourage you to keep sharing your stories. Share them with your friends. Share them with your family. Share them with your senators.
TikTok blasted out this message, urging users to call their members of Congress
and warning, if passed, the proposed bill would destroy the livelihoods of countless creators.
Lawmakers say their phones rang off the hook.
China made an app so popular that the government has to ban it. That means communist China beat free market America at capitalism, all right?
You're telling me that the only thing that this stupid fucking Congress can decide on is to take away my fucking TikTok!
Let's not pretend that Facebook and other social media companies haven't been selling US data to Chinese companies for years. So if you're gonna make this about China, at least be consistent.
And this worked. Congressman Crenshaw mentioned that there was a petition going around TikTok. They got your calls and messages. He was very annoyed by it.
TikTok's pressure campaign appears to have backfired. In a rare show of bipartisanship, a House committee voted unanimously in favor of the legislation.
Now, before we dive into global politics and national security, I want to spend some time talking about what the immediate impacts of a TikTok ban would be, specifically from the point of view of marketers and TikTok creators themselves. So let's share some stats really quick. Now, according to Goldman Sachs, the creator economy is a $250 billion industry and is projected to double to $480 billion by 2027. So projected to double 3 years from now. Wow. Now, the vast majority of income for content creators is through brand deals, which, P.S., I do not have any sponsors. And if any of you work for any brands or companies that are looking for opportunities to spend your really elaborate, large ad budget, I am more than happy to help remedy the situation for you with all of this ad real estate. Shall we auction it off? I'm saying $10, $10, $20, $20, $40 sold. Hey, leave me a comment below if you think that brands should sponsor my videos. Thanks, guys. Now, according to TikTok and Oxford Economics, TikTok by itself contributed to $24 billion to the US economy in 2023. They claim that TikTok supported 224,000 small business jobs in the US and that the total tax revenue coming from these businesses to the US was $5.3 billion. And this is in comparison to Oxford Economics' study on YouTube, which contributed $35 billion to the US economy in 2022. I couldn't find 2023 numbers, but it's clear that TikTok is catching up and catching up fast. And since I'm a bit of a newbie when it comes to this content creation game, I decided to reach out to my friend Jenna to ask more about the business and content creation side of this whole TikTok ban thing. Jenna, thank you so much for joining us today. Could you please introduce yourself for the audience really quick?
Yeah, my name is Jenna. I am a content creator for myself as well as for brands, mostly in the Twin Cities area where I know Caroline as well. And I do YouTube as well, where I talk about Notion, ADHD, digital organization, and productivity. I also have a TikTok account where it's mostly just for myself. I like to have fun on there. So I think we're going to be talking about that today and kind of some of the updates that are coming with that.
Okay, my first question for you is, what were your initial thoughts when you first heard about this ban?
Well, I mean, it has been potentially been banned since 2020. Like, they have had multiple times going to Congress, and this is the first time it's actually been passed through, I think, the first round of voting. And it was surprising because it was both sides of the aisle when it comes to political parties. Both really wanted this. My first thought was, well, what's the reason? I mean, why didn't it get passed before? Why is this a big deal now? And so I think right now, the fact that it was able to get through in 4 days, that's crazy. Nothing gets through that fast ever. But what it really impacts is our marketing, really of small businesses, the TikTok shop, so many businesses have used it. And also only 10% of TikTok users are in the United States. I think people don't think about that. This is a huge business in a lot of other countries. So I'm really curious to see what will happen. I don't think they're going to sell because 90% of their audience is not even in the US. I understand the concern, but I also feel like we should be doing the same with Facebook. We should be doing the same with Google. I think the bigger issue to think about is the impact of this in terms of how is this going to impact businesses and marketing. And for some people, that's all they have. I know somebody who has 400,000 followers on TikTok and less than 10,000 on Instagram. So it's what's going to happen to him when if TikTok gets shut down and we cannot access it? Are people going to use VPNs? Are there going to be roundabout ways? Or are we just, everyone's going to stop using it and then everyone just has to flood to the other apps? I don't know. That's the thing that we really don't know, but I'm assuming we're going to just see an influx of a bunch of other apps. That's what I think if this actually does happen.
So what advice do you have for marketers and content creators, whether they're small businesses, big businesses, whatever, on how to proceed if this does happen? Should we be planning for this ahead of time, or can we wait? What do you think?
I would say always be expanding beyond one app. I always consider myself not to be content centric on a specific app. So this is not only now, but always. Always have multiple different platforms that you're building. And this is why I like short form content, which is what TikTok is. You can save all your videos, you can remove the watermark and share them to multiple platforms. YouTube Shorts, Instagram Reels, Pinterest, Twitter, Facebook Reels, all those videos that you're creating, you should be also telling your audience where to find you on other platforms. I would say this is true for all social media platforms. You literally never know. You can get your Instagram account shut down randomly. So I think for myself, having an email list is a really, really important aspect, especially for all small business owners, is you can own that list. You can use that, and it's very important to build that connection. LinkedIn is another great one as well, because it's it's about you. It's about building your personal brand beyond just TikTok and Instagram.
And if there was one thing you could say to congressional officials to just basically state your opinion here, what would you tell them?
I would say really understand the long-term impact of this, not only on the Gen Z voters, but also on the businesses.
Okay, so why is this happening and why is Congress moving forward with this? Well, Congress is justifying this bill by saying that TikTok presents a major threat to national security. So let's break down this national security issue. The first thing that you need to know is that TikTok's parent company ByteDance is effectively controlled by the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party. Now, in the US, companies are run with, frankly, very little oversight from the government. There are exceptions to this, like there are industries that have heavy amounts of regulation, and primarily in industries like healthcare or automobiles or food. Like, we still don't have comprehensive regulation for online data privacy, and we probably won't thanks to Chuck Schumer, who, yes, still uses a flip phone. And at the end of the day, that's kind of it. For better or worse, we don't have a lot of regulation on companies, and there's a lot these companies can get away with. But this is not what it's like in China. Communist governments like China have the ability to exercise full control over companies if they want to. Now, what does this mean? It doesn't necessarily mean that the CCP is running day-to-day operations at companies like ByteDance, but the CCP does have a 1% stake in ByteDance, and they have a seat on the board. So there is a direct line between the CCP and ByteDance.
TikTok is owned by ByteDance. The editor-in-chief of ByteDance is himself the secretary of the very Chinese Communist Party cell embedded in the leadership of ByteDance. And his duty, according to him, is to make sure that TikTok and other products abide by correct political direction.
And it means that if the CCP calls you and tells you to do something, whether it's selling data of US users, promoting videos that American users made that China either agrees with or wants to promote for some other reason, or asking them to ping tens of thousands of American TikTok users and suggesting that they perhaps call their congressional representatives to try to persuade them to promote legislation that is in the Chinese government's best interest, that they very likely have the ability to do so. So, okay, we get it, but what's the actual security threat? Now, if you watch cable news or talk to anyone who's emotionally over 40 years old, including our congressional officials, they're all going to tell you the same thing.
They accuse ByteDance of sharing data with China to spy on Americans.
They worry that the Chinese parent company ByteDance has access and is perhaps giving data from TikTok to the Chinese government.
The lawmakers behind the bill say apps that are controlled by foreign adversaries such as China collect way too much information on the Americans who use the apps, and pose security risks to the United States.
The problem is the algorithm that powers it is controlled by a company in China that must do whatever the Chinese Communist Party tells them to do.
However, to me, that explanation didn't seem to tell the whole story. I mean, I just watched a phenomenal video a few weeks ago by the infamous Johnny Harris, which you should definitely check out if you haven't already, about how we are currently basically in a cyber cold war and how everybody already has everybody else's data and, you know, pointing finger guns at each other, being like, if you press the buttons, I'll press the buttons, kind of a situation. Yet, even when I went to famed tech journalist Kara Swisher's book tour at the Westminster Forum here in Minneapolis, she was using the exact same vague language. Granted, in my footage, you can see that the room was filled with older people who maybe didn't want to have the in-depth technical conversation, but here's what she said.
Just to start, and we've got a question or two here, just if you could say a little bit about what the actual threat that they are trying to address.
Well, I wrote a column about this about 5 or 6 years ago saying I love TikTok, it's the best new app, and I use it on a burner phone, just so you know, because Chinese Communist Party, I'm sorry. They are our adversary in tech all over the world, especially in cyber issues. They are our adversary. They are, I'm sorry. Read Xi Jinping's statements and speeches, and you will understand what their goal is. Now, there's a way of the internet to be like the Chinese internet, and then there's our way. Our way is a mess. Theirs is authoritarian in the extreme. We're a surveillance economy, but they want to sell us socks on Instagram. There, they want to follow people and control people. Look, I think there should be a privacy bill. I think we should rein in our tech giants. I think we should have antitrust. But this is a very different story. And one of the things they're debating right now is whether it's a First Amendment issue again. It's a foreign adversary that wants to buy a broadcast network that goes to 170 million people. They couldn't buy CNN, which is much smaller by a factor of like a zillion. They couldn't buy CBS. They couldn't buy a broadcast. This is an entertainment broadcast network that has the potential to be surveillance, and I'm not that worried about it, but it's certainly there, and propaganda.
So while I left that event with a signed copy of her new book, which you should absolutely check out, I was still left a bit confused and decided to call my friend Chuck Peters. Chuck is currently building a journalism startup called Ambit, but he also...
Before starting Ambit, I was a Big Four consulting manager advising big tech industry about data privacy and online safety, and that includes things like misinformation, disinformation, coordinated inauthentic behavior, and attacks from foreign governments to try to do influence campaigns in our information ecosystem by weaponizing social media platforms.
So I wanted to get to the nitty-gritty of it. What is the bigger problem here? Is it actually data privacy or is it something else?
So my first question for you is, why is Congress pursuing a ban on TikTok, and why now?
TikTok and Congress have been at odds for a few years now. It started back in the Trump administration with recognizing that there were some risks to a foreign-owned media company operating in the United States. It took a bit of a sidestep for the last 4 years, but as of recently, new reports have come out that Congress is understanding some new risks associated with a foreign-owned government operating a tool that has the attention of 170 million Americans. And what that also includes is trade inequality, where the United States does not have the opportunity to use Facebook or Instagram or other media companies, even traditional media like CNBC, MSNBC, Fox News, things like that. They're not allowed there. And so there's a two-sided issue where there's trade inequality, and then also with that inequality, there are some risks associated with the Chinese Communist Party having access to push information out to 170 million Americans through an algorithmically driven feed.
In your opinion, as somebody who has worked in cybersecurity, who has had to see firsthand these types of challenges that TikTok potentially poses, what would you say is the biggest threat that TikTok poses to national security here in the US?
There's been a lot of focus about data privacy, which, don't get me wrong, is certainly an issue, and the US is lagging behind other countries such as the European Union with some of their regulations. Data privacy is an issue, but I wouldn't say that's the leading issue. If you remember back to 2015 and 2016, there was the Brexit vote in 2015 and the 2016 election where Donald Trump upset Hillary Clinton. Part of the reason for swinging that election was what was commonly referred as the Cambridge Analytica scandal, where Cambridge Analytica, which is an analytics firm, inappropriately accessed third-party data from Facebook, and then he used that to hyper-target Facebook users by identifying who would be swing voters in those elections, targeting them with specific advertisements and promotional campaigns that would sway their vote. So with the Cambridge Analytica scandal, how that is different now with China is that Russia and others who wanted to manipulate and weaponize social media had to use marketing campaigns and pay for advertisements, create fake accounts, things of that nature. The difference with TikTok is that American content is already on TikTok. TikTok owns the platform, they own the algorithm. There's not a lot of transparency around how that algorithm works. What they could do is just put their thumb on the scale around what content is available to swing voters in America, or share slightly more negative content that over time adds up and reduces American sentiment towards America or towards some of our allies as a way to create havoc both domestically and abroad. The other thing that they can do is they can share propagandist content with Americans, identifying what some of their biases are and using that as a way to drive polarization between the left and the right, which we've seen as a trend over the last 20 years. When you put that through an algorithmically driven feed that can understand who their users are, in some cases more effectively than even the users understand themselves. And what I mean by that is, back in 2015, there was a study that Facebook was able to identify some of your trends and some of your personality traits better than you could understand about yourself, simply just by running machine learning models on your data. China having access to both your personal data with a tool to put their thumb on the scale and push out content that can influence how you view not just the world, but how you view other Americans and the content you see on a day-to-day basis, that can have an impact over the long run. The thing I would add is that 1/3 of Americans, TikTok users under the age of 30, go there primarily for their source of news. And so TikTok isn't just this innocent platform where people go and see, the latest dancing trends. They go and see, what food to eat in their city. 1/3 of people under the age of 30 are going there to get news-related content. And so if TikTok and the Chinese Communist Party have the ability to influence what information, specifically news-related information, they're able to consume and make decisions on about who we select to represent us in our government, who then have to go and sit at the same table as the Chinese government whenever we have diplomatic talks, that has an impact in the long run.
Are there any other threats that TikTok could pose that we haven't even touched upon outside of the data and propaganda piece, or are those the main things that we should be thinking about?
I think those are the main things to point out from a threat perspective. The last thing I would say about the Chinese government is that they do have a willingness. The Chinese government has shown that they're willing to force even the largest companies to bend the knee. So Jack Ma, the founder of Alibaba, went missing after criticizing the Chinese government, which is not something that the Chinese government takes lightly. It's not clear what exactly happened, but he went missing for a while and then resurfaced, living a quiet life as a professor at a university.
Okay, let's pause for a second here in case any of you don't know who Jack Ma is. I want you to imagine if Jeff Bezos suddenly went missing and 2 years later became a professor at the University of Toronto and suddenly publicly had no interest in Amazon, because that's what happened to Jack Ma.
It's presumed that the Chinese government had an influence there. So if people at TikTok were to say, hey, we want to do the right thing, not allow the Chinese government to interfere here, that's not necessarily an option. So this situation is effectively a competition between the US government and the Chinese government, where TikTok and ByteDance are intermediaries that don't have any power.
Now, TikTok swears that their leadership and TikTok's code are not intertwined with ByteDance and the CCP, and that in general China is not involved with anything that is happening at TikTok. But like Kara said, of course they are.
I believe the TikTok executives when they say they're not meddling, but of course they are, because every company I've ever covered in tech in China has been meddled with by the Chinese government. Of course they'll do it. Every national security person I believe them when they say this, and I know you shouldn't trust national security people, but in this case, you have to be naive at best to not understand that if you had this tool, you would use it. FYI, we can't be in China with our social media networks, because guess what we do? We spy on them. That's what we do with it. Like, our government would immediately get in there and be like, yay. That's what they did before. You can see Edward Snowden. I'm sort of like perplexed why it's a debate. It's a national security debate. And even if they aren't doing it, which they are, they absolutely are, they can do it.
The reality is, even if TikTok executives are not talking to the CCP, are not necessarily even talking to ByteDance leadership, and are doing their best to do the right thing, which frankly I think they are, TikTok doesn't own the code that runs the famous TikTok algorithm. ByteDance does. And because of that, ByteDance would very likely be able to pull strings behind the scenes without anybody at TikTok even noticing. These types of things are incredibly subtle, sneaky little backdoor kind of situations. And frankly, they're incredibly hard for even top cybersecurity professionals to spot. And that also creates complications about TikTok and selling TikTok to an American company. Because again, TikTok doesn't own the algorithm, ByteDance does. And since that is the case, even if an American company were likely to purchase TikTok, what they're going to be getting is a list of users and their email addresses, maybe some data on them, and wireframes for, what the app itself looks like and how it functions, a crap ton of marketing materials and that brand IP, but you're not going to get the code that actually is how TikTok works. And while it may not go away fully, it's possible that the algorithm itself is just not going to be the same or not going to be nearly as valuable. And while Kara Fisher is right that there is a tremendous amount of money, American money, that has been investing in ByteDance, and that they do not want to see that go away, and so therefore TikTok is not going to go away, if there is a real deal national security case that Congress decides they want to reveal, it's very possible it could go any direction. And at this point, I'm viewing this as a 50-50 situation. However, there is something missing here in the conversation that we still need to cover. We need to talk about how young people are taking the news from Congress and why. The reality is, young people are not buying the argument that spooky, scary China has our data. Oh no! They don't believe that this is a real problem because they already know that governments and companies all over the world already have all of our data, and that at the end of the day, we are in a cyber Cold War, even if that's not necessarily the word choice that young people would use to describe the situation.
I work in politics full time, and I've worked with members of Congress consistently over the last 4 years when it comes to legislation, and this is how I feel about this TikTok ban bill. Nobody invades our privacy but me and maybe the boy being Facebook, Google, and Twitter.
And like, I interned for Chuck Schumer. That is somebody who still uses a flip phone, like unironically still uses a flip phone to communicate, because TikTok is only doing what many, many other social media companies have done for decades, even if they're not from an adversarial government. And adversarial influence has always been a thing in the United States. Do I really have to remind you of this? Why isn't Facebook undergoing the same restrictions that ByteDance is now having to do? Because clearly, being based in the US isn't doing much for adversarial governments getting involved in US politics.
Oh, and real quick, the claim about them harvesting your data, like, you clearly don't understand the nature of cyber warfare today, and you should read this book, do a little research. China's in all of our shit anyways. They can have all of our data whether you outlaw an app or not, and like, who the fuck cares? Like, what are they gonna do? Force me to buy a knockoff product on Amazon? Like,
and they also recognize that this is a massive problem that Congress is refusing to regulate in any meaningful way, and that this bill is not effective regulation for privacy and data problems that we are currently experiencing.
With Congressman Dan Crenshaw saying, and this isn't because we're old and we don't know how to use the technology. We know that you use it for your business and for your assembly. But in 1999, someone in China said that they wouldn't use the military to defeat America. They would come at us another way, and he is insinuating that they are coming at us through TikTok. He also said that any entity that could manipulate the American people into madness should be stopped, and so I am very much looking forward to his comments on Fox News and Facebook. He then admitted that this legislation will not stop foreign companies from buying our data from a million other places.
This should go without saying, but the US government is not at all concerned with our privacy. Meta had to settle a $725 million class action lawsuit after being found guilty for selling users' data to third parties without their knowledge or consent. One of those third parties, by the way, was Cambridge Analytica, which used illegally harvested data from users to spread political propaganda and misinformation about the 2016 election, and is probably the reason Donald Trump became president. The US government does not care even a little bit about your data privacy. In fact, we have some of the worst data protections in the entire world.
If this is really about national security, then we would be passing a sweeping bill to crack down on Facebook and Twitter as well. And I would not have a problem with Congress passing a bill that has to do with all of these social media companies at once. And if the result of that was then TikTok had to do extra measures because of their parent company, I would be okay with that. Why? Because that would be fair and balanced. But don't tell me that the whole concern about national security is only applicable to TikTok when it's proven that Facebook has purposefully let misinformation run rampant on the site.
No, we're doing it to protect your data. We're doing it because we're worried about the algorithm. Meanwhile, my data has been stolen 16 times in the last 5 years. You want to know how I know that? Because I've been in 16 class action lawsuits about my stolen fucking data that I didn't even know was stolen.
And at this point, young people are ready to throw up their hands and say, we've already lost. And at the end of the day, what's the point? It no longer feels like much of a threat, even if it is or it should be. In addition, most TikTok users and young people know that the better argument that should be made in this situation is China's ability to potentially spread misinformation and propaganda. However, what concerns me is that on the app itself, there seems to be a consensus that if there was propaganda or China trying to influence American politics, that it would be very easy to spot and they would know what it is.
What I wish these lawmakers would understand is that the American public does not trust them. It's sort of the whole thing about politicians that they're not trustworthy people, especially because what they're claiming is that China is somehow manipulating the algorithm to make us believe things that politically damages the United States. But wouldn't that be obvious? Wouldn't it be pretty clear that all of a sudden the American public is starting to believe something that they didn't believe previously? Or there'd be some kind of rise in a particular political stance? Because I can only think of one thing on TikTok where that has been the case.
Now, part of this has to do with young people's experience with Cambridge Analytica and Russia's attempt to influence American elections back in 2016. The Russian bots were pretty easy to spot if you were under 40 and spent too much time online, like me. And so when young people think about how China would potentially try to convince them to influence elections or their perspective on any political issues, they assume that, like the Russian bots, it's going to be easy to spot. But funnily enough, this TikToker hit the nail on the head.
China's not going to target U.S. citizens with our data. Like, you're going to send me anti-government propaganda to subvert our American democracy? Like, no need. I'll make that content myself for you. See, government, the problem is when you have a country where freedom of speech is literally the First Amendment of your Constitution, your own citizens are allowed to make anti-government content when you suck ass at your job.
But here's the reality. We know that there is a direct line to ByteDance from the CCP through being on the board and through ownership in ByteDance. We know that ByteDance owns TikTok's code and has very likely put little sneaky backdoors and found ways to mess with the code without anybody at TikTok knowing. We know that China is currently America's #1 adversary that we are actively in the process of divesting from. And we know that Russia and Cambridge Analytica created the blueprint needed to influence American elections. And we know that China doesn't need to spend all of that money, all of that people, and all of that effort in order to create sketchy-looking bots that are relatively easy to spot. Why would they if they had access to TikTok's code and could find very sneaky ways to promote videos that fire people up, that cause heated debates, that cause Americans to not trust one another? They don't need bots to persuade us anymore. They can use content that is already being made by Americans that they know is extra inflammatory and promote that content in really subtle ways that people may not even notice. Or maybe promoting topics that they know are going to encourage people to question authority or the media.
But wouldn't that be obvious? Wouldn't it be pretty clear that all of a sudden the American public is starting to believe something that they didn't believe previously? Or there'd be some kind of rise in a particular political stance? Because I can only think of one thing on TikTok where that has been the case.
So here's the question. Did TikTok, or more accurately, ByteDance, purposefully try to persuade young people to support Palestinians or Hamas over Israel over the last several months by taking videos or video topics that were made by real Americans with real American opinions and just giving them a little bit of an extra boost? Honestly, without looking at the source code itself, it's extremely hard to tell. There are a few things that we know. We know that the hashtag Free Palestine was used dramatically more than any other hashtag, and that content focused on young, innocent Palestinians and Hamas dramatically outmatched the conversation around Israel.
The question of why is this happening now is really interesting. And I think it has a lot to do, frankly, with something that we haven't talked about much on this show, which is the conflict in Israel and Gaza. There's a sort of coalition of people in Washington who believe that TikTok is being used to kind of turn American public opinion against Israel.
You know, around this time, there was a tool that advertisers could use to track the performance of various hashtags. And some researchers used it to see that videos with pro-Palestine hashtags appeared at times to be getting more than 60 times more views than videos with pro-Israel hashtags.
We know that congressional officials are deeply worried about this. And we suspect that whatever the congressional officials saw in their security briefing has to do with data from this issue. However, there is something that I'm not seeing on cable news that isn't fitting here. Because if you ask TikTok users, they will tell you that TikTok has very notably been trying to suppress videos about the conflict in Gaza.
But wouldn't that be obvious? Wouldn't it be pretty clear that all of a sudden the American public is starting to believe something that they didn't believe previously? Or there'd be some kind of rise in a particular political stance? Because I can only think of one thing on TikTok where that has been the case. One thing. And I think we all know what that one thing is. But as a content creator with 165,000 followers, I have made videos about that particular subject, and every time I have, it has been actively suppressed.
But back in October, when there was a lot more of us posting about the horrors that were going on, I posted 4 or 5 videos, and that was really difficult for me. Poor me, poor content creator. But because of those videos that I posted, TikTok specifically did not like it. I'm not talking about TikTokers, the people that are viewing my videos. I'm talking about TikTok, the social media platform.
Everyone on TikTok knows that the TikTok ban has nothing to do with China. It's all about Israel. Been talking to a lot of people involved with the bill on Twitter Spaces, and there's one thing they all have in common. They're not on TikTok. And if they were, they would know that it's not China hashtags that are getting censored. It's Israel hashtags. And I accidentally proved this yesterday when I posted this video about how AIPAC is sponsoring the TikTok ban bill, and I hashtagged it with Free Palestine. See, right there, Free Palestine, and it immediately got throttled, and I could tell it was gonna get no views. So I reposted it with no hashtag, and about 12 hours later, no hashtags equals almost 500,000 views. And Free Palestine hashtags, 23,000 views.
Anybody who creates content on here will tell you that it's really obvious when they're amplifying certain subjects. You want to know what those subjects usually are? The Oscars, Dune, anything in pop culture. In fact, I would say that the rise of that particular political stance is in spite of TikTok, because it's against their best interests to have tragic subjects on their app all the time. They want to keep people using the platform. They want to keep people having fun.
And despite the overt censorship of pro-Palestinian content on TikTok, Palestinian support hashtags are the most viewed of all hashtags, and Israel support hashtags are non-existent because we all see what's going on.
But if I'm incorrect and there's intelligence to prove otherwise, show us.
Young people on the app know to not use certain terms when they're either speaking in a video or writing things in the description or using certain hashtags in order to make sure that their videos and their comments and their posts see the most views, which is now why many young TikTokers, instead of saying something like hashtag Gaza, hashtag Palestine, or anything like that, will instead use emojis of watermelon to indicate that they support freeing Palestine. Another thing that I haven't seen talked about when people are talking about how many times the hashtag Free Palestine has been posted across TikTok is we don't actually have solid data where those hashtags are going. TikTok used to just count the number of hashtags that were prevalent across the entire app, which includes in the descriptions of videos or also in comments. But from my own personal observation, it does look like the people who are using hashtag Free Palestine the most are young people who are leaving comments across the app. So the reality is we actually don't have good data to determine why hashtags like Free Palestine have been used more on that platform than anywhere else, or that much more versus hashtags supporting Israel. Did team members at ByteDance try to promote this content while employees at TikTok have been trying to suppress it? Or do young people in the US just really support innocent Palestinian civilians who have been harmed during this conflict? Frankly, I'm tempted to believe that it's the latter. And the reason why is because it matches with a lot of trends that we have been seeing for over a decade. Even back in 2014, the Pew Research Center found that young people were far more likely to support Palestinians than they were Israel. Frankly, this isn't a new concept. But one of the things that I found really interesting while watching this all unfold on TikTok is not necessarily ByteDance trying to promote content or TikTok trying to suppress content, but how many young people, presumably, are commenting on videos across the board talking about young civilian journalists in Gaza, including young women like Bisan.
This is Bisan from Gaza. I'm still alive. And these are some figures you need to know how is the situation now in Gaza after 70 days of continuous bombing.
I saw comments about Bisan on other people's TikTok videos before ever seeing a video featuring Bisan. And over the last several months, I have seen hundreds of comments of people talking about how they check TikTok every day, multiple times a day, to see if Bisan is still alive. I think the reality is young people are far more connected on a global scale than ever before. It is not surprising to me that there are many Gen Zers and millennials who see TikTokers like Bisan who want to help innocent civilians in a war that they can see in the palm of their hands. However, no matter how horrible it is, we have to acknowledge that China could be trying to pull the strings here. Both of these things can be true at the same time. Americans can want to help others, and China could also use that to their advantage. And that's a very uncomfortable and awkward spot to be in. When it came to Russia trying to influence elections, their goal was not to promote one idea over the other. Their goal was to cause general chaos and getting people to be more polarized. They wanted to take ideas that people already had and push them away from each other in opposite directions. So even then, it's also entirely possible that China is trying to promote the fact that there is a generational divide between young Americans and older Americans on this issue. And at the end of the day, when it comes to Congress, I think this is probably what they are most worried about. Unless we hear otherwise in the future, which is possible, it does look like there is no hard evidence that China is doing anything. But without access to the source code, frankly, there isn't going to be any clear evidence of whether they're pulling strings behind the scenes. But if you are looking at this from a national security perspective or from a political perspective, there's a lot of things to think about and a lot of things that have happened. There is currently a big gap in opinion along generational lines, and there are 170 million Americans, mostly under the age of 25, who are on TikTok. And on top of that, we just had a huge surge in people voting in elections like Minnesota and like Michigan, of people voting uncommitted as a protest vote to protest how the Democrats are handling the situation in Gaza. Which, yeah, I think really spooked Congress and President Biden. Personally, it sounds like Democrats are worried they have another Cambridge Analytica issue on their hands, and Republicans are just really excited to take down China. And while I think that the Democrats' fear of another nation trying to influence elections through social media is very valid, I also don't think that they recognize how they could severely be shooting themselves in the foot here when it comes to the election. And it also seems to me that the Democratic Party is avoiding some issues that they really need to start taking more seriously. Because the reality is, China could be trying to push Americans to have one opinion over the other, but the content is still being made by Americans. And it's made by young Americans who frankly understand the technical issues at hand better than congressional officials do, and who have every right to complain over several major issues that have not been addressed in our country for decades. So what do I think? In general, I think we have a both and kind of situation. I think that the chances are that we have a real security issue or national security threats because of TikTok's connection to ByteDance in China is very real. Even if China hasn't done anything yet, I think that threat is very real. There are a whole lot of scenarios that we should be thinking about, including but not limited to China trying to invade Taiwan and creating some sort of lies on the platform. I also think that Congress and cable news are doing a very bad job of explaining what is going on, and that their arguments have not been persuasive because they don't fully understand what they're talking about. However, I also think that if Congress passes this ban, that the Democrats may very well lose this election. And the reason why is because, again, I don't think people who are emotionally over the age of 40 understand how important this app is for young Americans, both financially and emotionally.
TikTok is not an app for videos of dancing kids. TikTok is an app for journalism. Most of TikTok is talking head videos like this of people sharing information, and that is why it is dangerous to them. If you're not on TikTok, I guarantee you have no idea what you're talking about, because it is not what you've been told and it is not what you think it is.
I've spent a lot of time the last couple of days trying to figure out like why this bothers me so much. And I think that's it. It's because this is like the first place that I have felt like I could just be myself, my like weird self. And like, for goodness sake, like I have such an imposter syndrome complex about my entire life. Like, if I'm being honest, I went to law school and became a lawyer because I was like, maybe this will make people think that I'm smart enough, and maybe this will make people, want to hear what Dylan has to say. It didn't, by the way, and it doesn't. And really the only thing that's ever done that besides my family is this. I think that that's why this gets to me so much, especially when like I hear some of the stories about the representatives that just like turned off the phones in their offices because they just didn't want to listen anymore. I'm looking at the situation going like, I'm older than some of you. Like, I feel pretty confident in my ability to make choices, and that agency relationship is very different now.
There's something different about TikTok's algorithm, and it's hard to explain. TikTok's speed in community aspect is dramatically different than Instagram Reels or YouTube Shorts. So even if the structure of these platforms are very similar, the personalization effects are just not the same. Probably because they have an enormous amount of data on us. Eek! And part of the reason why young people find this to be so absurd is because they can't believe how ridiculous it is that TikTok is what's bringing politicians across the aisle when there are some very real important problems that young people are going through every day that they believe are dramatically more important.
I want you to think about the last time you heard 81% of our Congress agreeing on anything. Think about anything for the last 4 years. 81%. Shit, to pick the Speaker of the House, it took 18 votes, and he barely got through. Remember that? Remember how many times this year alone, we've had to have votes for the Speaker of the House?
Hey friend, what are you working on? Oh wow. No, I'm just so surprised because don't you have other things to be working on right now? Reproductive rights, common sense gun laws, listening to constituents. Wow, yeah, lots going on, huh? TikTok isn't even on this list, friend.
This is not an attempt to ban TikTok. It's an attempt to make TikTok better. Tic-tac-toe. A winner. A winner.
Can we not do this? I understand that the former Speaker of the House likely really thought she was doing something here, but that was not the zinger she thought it'd be. Truly, this just feels like another example of how absolutely out of touch so many of our representatives are. We don't want viral moments of, ooh, got him. We want our politicians to take our concerns seriously and vote on our behalf in our best interest. Besides the fact that it's a decision that would alienate the majority of already incredibly frustrated young voters. And besides the fact that there are so many other issues we could address with this much bipartisan support. But hey, at least Nancy Pelosi had her "how do you do, fellow kids" moment.
Show us the receipts, because the look of impropriety is crazy. Like, this just reeks of like global financial manipulation. Show us what the intelligence is so that we can be on your side. Otherwise, you should know that it looks weird to just tell us to believe you when you're voting to manipulate global markets.
I think young people are right to be upset that Congress is prioritizing banning TikTok. I also think that young people need to seriously consider how bad the security risk could be from TikTok and from China, and I think that Congress needs to do a better job of explaining what these actual risks are in a very intelligent way. This situation is not black and white, no matter how much we want it to be. Meanwhile, Trump is taking advantage of the situation by changing his stance after getting a large amount of donations from a specific American investor in ByteDance. However, we all know that Trump is not a serious person who has serious beliefs and only is in everything for himself. So, frankly, I don't really care what he does. But even though this is a bipartisan bill, I do think that Democrats have the most to lose in this situation. And while I think our congressional officials are in a challenging situation, I do think young Americans are right that we need dramatically better, sweeping data privacy legislation in this country. That said, if TikTok is banned, I want to encourage young people to remain hopeful. This isn't the first time that we have lost a social media platform or seen dramatic algorithmic changes, though this is possibly the strangest and most abrupt. I encourage you to educate yourself on these issues and also recognize that the misinformation campaigns of the past are going to seem archaic compared to the ones of the future. The Russian bots from 2016 are long gone. With generative AI, we're going to see far more sophisticated misinformation campaigns. And in situations like this with TikTok, it's going to become easier than ever to pit people against one another when really what we should be trying to do is come together. The reality is, when it comes to this upcoming election and when it comes to the next several years, we're in for a wild ride. And this is only the beginning. Oh my goodness, thank you so much for watching. And if you haven't been here before, welcome to my tech evaluation show called Swift Start Go. Please let me know what your thoughts are after watching this in the comments down below, and like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Also, hope that you didn't mind me showing off my signed copy of Burn Book. Really cool book. You should definitely check it out. But a little bit about me, for those of you who don't know, I spent the last 7 years working in startups, tech, and venture capital. And yes, I'm still job hunting in case any of you want to hire me for some reason. I do lots of things like these. Also, thank you so much for all of you who've been leaving me really nice comments on my last 2 videos in the last 2 weeks. Seriously, they've been making my day. I love the discussion, and I'm sorry if I've been slow to reply to some of these, because this video, oh my god, this video was so hard, you guys. I spent like the entire week making this video, and all of my friends were like, are you okay? Can you like come outside? I'm like, no, sorry, I'm busy. I'm making a video about the TikTok ban. It's really important. So yeah, my next few videos are probably going to be a little bit less intensive of this, because yeah, this was bananas. And also, after you're done letting me know what you thought of this video in the comments, feel free to leave more comments about what videos I should be doing next. Thank you, Jenna and Chuck, for coming onto my show. Yeah, I'll see you next time. I know I keep saying Friday, but I don't think Friday is my release schedule anymore. I think it might be Mondays. No promises. Bye.
You are becoming more and more loyal to the CCP. China, good. Communism, good. America, bad.